When I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree, I wasn't sure what to do with. I took a job at a 24-hour pharmacy in suburban Michigan. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid better than retail, and the overnight shift came with a differential that made my student loan payments almost manageable. The store was one of those massive chain pharmacies that sold everything from greeting cards to frozen pizzas. And during the night shift, it was just me and one other person manning the entire place. For the first few weeks, I worked with an older woman named Patricia who'd been doing overnights for years. She taught me the ropes, how to handle the rare customer who came in at 3 a.m., how to restock efficiently, and most importantly, how to look busy when the district manager did surprise visits. She was planning to retire soon, and I knew I'd miss her calm presence. When Patricia left, they brought in her replacement. His name was Derek. He was probably in his mid-30s, average height, with wire-rimmed glasses and a way of standing too close when he talked to you. During his first shift, he seemed nervous, which I understood. Overnights could be eerie when you weren't used to them. The fluorescent lights buzzing, the empty aisles, the occasional customer who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. But Derek's nervousness manifested in odd ways. He'd walk up behind me without making any sound, then suddenly start talking, making me jump every single time. When I'd turn around startled, he'd laugh this high-pitched giggle that didn't match his appearance at all. "Gotcha," he'd say, like we were playing a game I hadn't agreed to. The first week, I tried to be understanding. New job jitters, trying to bond with a coworker through humor. I get it, but it kept happening, multiple times per shift. And it was always when I was focused on something, organizing shelves or counting inventory. I'd be completely absorbed in what I was doing, and then boom, there he was inches behind me. I started wearing headphones with no music playing, just so I had an excuse to seem less startled. "Oh, sorry, couldn't hear you coming," I'd say, but I could tell from a look on his face that he knew I was lying. He seemed almost disappointed when I didn't jump. Around the third week, things got stranger. We had security cameras throughout the store, and the monitor sat in the back office where we took our breaks. One night, I went back there to eat my sandwich and noticed Derek on the camera screen. He was standing in the aisle I'd been working in just moments before, completely still, staring at the shelf, not stocking anything, not looking for anything, just standing there, staring at the exact spot where I'd been crouched down, organizing products. When I came back out, he was at the register like nothing had happened. "How's your break?" he asked with that weird smile. "Fine," I said, suddenly very aware of how empty the store was. The next incident happened about a week later. It was around 2 a.m., the deadest part of our shift. We usually spent this time doing deep cleaning or reorganizing seasonal displays. I was in the back stockroom getting more trash bags when I heard footsteps. The stockroom was long and narrow, lined with metal shelving units that created these maze-like pathways. The footsteps were getting closer, but I couldn't see anyone. "Derek," I called out. No response. Just the footsteps, slow and deliberate. The sound of shoes on concrete echoing off the walls. "Derek, is that you?" The footsteps stopped. For maybe 30 seconds, there was complete silence. Then I heard that same high-pitched giggle, but it sounded far away, maybe from the other side of the stockroom. I grabbed the trash bags and walked quickly back to the main floor, my heart pounding. When I got out there, Derek was at the photo counter, developing someone's pictures. He looked up at me with this innocent expression. "You okay? You look pale. Were you just in stockroom?" "No, been here the whole time. These photos are taking forever." He gestured at the machine. "Why? What happened?" I didn't know what to say. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just the building settling or something. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. That's when I started really paying attention to Derek's behavior. I noticed he'd volunteered to take over the security camera monitoring duties, something Patricia had always handled. He'd spend his breaks in that back office, and I started to wonder what exactly he was watching. I also noticed that items from my bag would be slightly moved when I came back from working the floor. Nothing stolen, just repositioned, like someone had been looking through it. The breaking point came about a month into working with him. It was a Thursday night, and we just locked the doors at closing time when a customer knocked, needing emergency medication. It happened sometimes. We let them in, and I went to help the pharmacist who'd come out from the back. Derek was supposed to be restocking the cold medicine aisle. The customer left after about 10 minutes, and I went to relock the front door. That's when I noticed Derek wasn't in the cold medicine aisle. I called his name. Nothing. I checked the stockroom, the office, the bathroom. The store wasn't that big. Where could he be? Then I saw him. He was standing in the greeting card aisle, holding his phone up, pointed directly at the security camera. As I watched, he lowered the phone, looked directly at where I was standing, and smiled. That same unsettling smile he always had. "What are you doing?" I asked, walking toward him. "Just checking something," he said casually, pocketing his phone. "Did you know these cameras have blind spots? Like, if you stand right here," he moved to a specific spot, "the camera can't see you at all." A chill ran down my spine. "Why would you need to know that?" He shrugged. "Just interesting, don't you think? All these cameras, but they can't see everything." I made an excuse about needing to call my roommate and went to the back office. I locked the door behind me and called my boyfriend instead, telling him something felt really wrong and asking him to stay on the phone with me. He could hear the fear in my voice and immediately said he was going to call the store. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, the store phone rang. I answered it, and my boyfriend, pretending to be a customer, asked to speak to the overnight manager. We didn't have one, but it gave me an excuse to tell Derek someone was calling with a complaint and I needed to handle it. I stayed in that locked office on the phone with my boyfriend until 6 a.m. when the morning shift arrived. When I came out, Derek was acting completely normal, asking me why I'd hidden in the office all night. I told him I wasn't feeling well. He said, "That's too bad. I was hoping we could talk more." We never really talked. I went straight to the store manager when she arrived and told her everything. The sneaking up on me, the weird behavior in the stockroom, the comment about camera blind spots. She seemed concerned, but said she needed to look into it. In the meantime, she tried to schedule me with different partners for a while. That night, I got a friend request on Facebook from an account with no profile picture. The account name was just a random string of numbers. When I clicked on it, there was only one photo visible, a picture of the pharmacy stockroom, taken from an angle that showed the exact spot where I'd heard those footsteps. The photo had been posted at 2:07 a.m. that night. I screenshotted everything and blocked the account immediately. I called my manager at home, and she told me not to come in for my next shift. She'd handle it. Turns out, Derek had been fired from 2 previous overnight positions. One for inappropriate behavior toward coworkers, and another for reasons the company wouldn't disclose due to legal issues. Somehow he'd slipped through the background check. The store fired him immediately, and I filed a police report, though they said without a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. I kept working overnights because I needed the money, but they paired me with a security guard for the next 2 months. Derek never came back, never tried to contact me again as far as I know. But for weeks afterward, every time I heard footsteps behind me, I'd whip around, heart racing. I started checking camera blind spots everywhere I went, wondering who else might be watching for places I couldn't see. It's been 3 years now, and I've moved on to a better job with normal hours. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about Derek standing in that aisle, smiling at me, telling me about the blind spots. I think about what he might have been planning to do in those spaces where the cameras couldn't see. And I'm grateful I trusted my instincts when I did, because I genuinely believe that if I hadn't locked myself in that office that night, something worse would have happened. The scariest part isn't even what he did. It's what he might have done, and the fact that I'll never really know. I was 24 when I got my first real marketing job at a small firm in downtown Seattle. It was one of those companies that rented 3 floors of a converted warehouse building, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, trying very hard to look hip and creative. We had about 30 employees, and everyone knew everyone else. It was the kind of place where people genuinely seemed to like coming to work, and for a while, I loved it too. In March, we hired a temp to help with a massive client project. His name was Brian. He was probably around 30, average looking, with dark hair he wore in a man bun before man buns were completely played out. He seemed enthusiastic about the work, maybe a little too enthusiastic, but we were drowning in deadlines, so enthusiasm was welcome. Brian's contract was for 6 weeks. He'd help us get through the project crunch, and then he'd move on to his next assignment. That was how temp work operated. Everyone understood this, including Brian, or at least I thought he did. The first couple of weeks were fine. Brian did his work, participated in meetings, and integrated pretty well with the team. He was one of those people who laughed a little too loud at jokes and tried really hard to be everyone's friend, but nothing about him raised any red flags. If anything, I felt kind of bad for him. Being a temp meant you were always on the outside looking in, never quite part of the permanent team. Around week 3, I started noticing something odd. Brian would engineer situations to work near me. If I was in the conference room, he'd suddenly need to use that space too. If I was getting coffee, he'd appear moments later. During team meetings, he'd position himself so he was sitting directly across from me, and I'd catch him staring when he thought I wasn't looking. At first, I figured he might have a crush on me, which was awkward but not unusual in an office setting. I started being less friendly, more professional, hoping he'd get the hint. He didn't. One afternoon, I was working late on a presentation. Most people had gone home, but I'd told my team I'd finish it that night. Around 7 p.m., I got up to stretch my legs and grab some water. When I came back to my desk, I found a post-it note stuck to my monitor. It said, "You work too hard. You should take a break sometime." B. It wasn't threatening, exactly, but something about it felt invasive. He'd been at my desk while I was gone. Had he looked at my screen? Touched my stuff? I peeled off the note and threw it away, making a mental note to keep my workspace locked when I left it. The next day, Brian asked me if I'd gotten his note. I said yes, kept my tone neutral, and turned back to my computer. He stood there for a moment, like he was waiting for me to say something else, then finally walked away. Week 4 of his contract, things escalated. I came in Monday morning to find a small succulent plant on my desk with another note. Thought your desk could use some life. B. This crossed the line. I went straight to my manager and told her about the notes and the plant. She sighed and said she'd talk to him. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to complain. Another woman on the design team had mentioned that Brian made her uncomfortable with constant compliments and questions about her personal life. My manager had a conversation with Brian that afternoon. He apologized profusely, said he was just trying to be friendly, and promised to keep things strictly professional. For the rest of that week, he barely spoke to me, which was a relief. But then his 6-week contract ended, and he didn't leave. I came in on Monday of week 7, and there he was, sitting at his temporary desk like nothing had changed. I asked my manager about it, and she looked confused. She checked with HR, who checked with the temp agency. Apparently, Brian had told the agency we were extending his contract. We weren't. HR called the agency to clarify, and they said they'd handle it. Tuesday, Brian was still there. When I walked past his desk, he looked up at me and smiled. "Looks like I'm sticking around a bit longer," he said cheerfully. My manager was furious. She called the agency again, and they assured her they'd informed Brian that his assignment was over. He was supposed to have reported to a new company that morning. Instead, he'd come to our office. Wednesday, our office manager asked Brian to leave. He became defensive, arguing that he'd done nothing wrong and that we couldn't just throw him out without cause. Technically, since the building was semi-public with multiple companies, they couldn't force him out without involving building security. Our office manager finally called security, who escorted Brian out while he protested the entire way. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Thursday morning, I got to work early. I was the first person in the office, which wasn't unusual for me. I made coffee, settled at my desk, and started going through emails. About 20 minutes later, I heard the main door open. Footsteps. I assumed it was another early bird coworker. Then Brian appeared in my cubicle entrance. I actually gasped. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you," he said calmly, without everyone else around. "You need to leave. You don't work here anymore." "I know, but you have to understand, I wasn't ready to go. I like it here. He paused. "I like being near you." My heart was pounding. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Brian, that's inappropriate. You need to leave right now, or I'm calling security." He didn't move. "Why are you being so cold? I thought we connected. I've been nothing but nice to you." I stood up, grabbed my phone, and started dialing. He watched me with this hurt expression, like I was the one being unreasonable. When I put the phone in my ear, he finally turned and walked toward the exit. "This isn't fair," he said over his shoulder. "You're not even giving me a chance." Security arrived 5 minutes later, but Brian was already gone. They checked the building and found that he'd somehow gotten a copy of an access card that hadn't been deactivated. They immediately invalidated all temp access cards and changed the building entry codes. The office manager filed a report with the police, and HR sent a formal complaint to the temp agency. I gave a statement describing everything that had happened. The police said they'd follow up, but without a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do beyond documenting the incident. For the next 2 weeks, I was paranoid. I'd arrive at work and check every room before settling in. I'd walk to my car in groups. I changed my routine, taking different routes, varying my schedule. Every time I saw someone who vaguely resembled Brian, my stomach would drop. Then about 3 weeks after the incident, I got an email. It came from a generic Gmail address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "You should have been nicer." The email itself was long and rambling. Brian went through every interaction we'd had, reinterpreting moments I'd thought were professional into what he believed were signs I was interested in him. He accused me of leading him on, of being fake, of ruining his life by getting him banned from the temp agency. The email ended with, "You're not as special as you think you are. Someone should teach you that." I forwarded it to the police immediately. This, they said, was enough for a restraining order. We went through the process, and Brian was served with papers prohibiting him from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my workplace or home. I never saw him again after that day in the office. The temp agency confirmed he'd been removed from their roster entirely. The police told me he'd moved to California a few months later for a new job. The restraining order remained in effect, but it didn't matter anymore. He was gone. Still, for months afterward, I'd get this tight feeling in my chest whenever I was the first person to arrive at work. I'd check over my shoulder constantly, convinced I'd see him standing there with that hurt, confused expression, unable to understand why I didn't welcome his attention. It's been 5 years now. I've changed jobs twice, moved to a new apartment, and I'm much more cautious about how I interact with temporary coworkers. I learned that friendly can be misinterpreted, that some people don't understand boundaries no matter how clearly you set them, and that your discomfort is never an overreaction. People sometimes ask me if I overreacted to Brian's behavior. After all, he never physically harmed me. He just left notes, bought a plant, sent an email. But I remember the look in his eyes that morning when he appeared in my cubicle, the way he spoke like he deserved access to me, like my rejection was a personal betrayal. I remember the dread I felt coming to work, checking my surroundings, wondering if he'd be there. No, I didn't overreact. If anything, I wish I'd reported him sooner. Because the thing about people like Brian is that they don't think they're doing anything wrong. And that's what makes them dangerous. When I was 19, I worked at a bowling alley in suburban Ohio. It was one of those family-owned places that had been around since the 70s, with worn carpet, flickering neon signs, and the constant sound of pins crashing in the background. The pay was minimum wage, but I got free games when I wasn't working, and most of my coworkers were people my age. It was a good first job, easy and low stress, at least at the beginning. I usually worked the evening shift, which meant I'd come in around 5 p.m. and leave around midnight when we closed. On weekends, we'd stay open until 2 a.m., and closing shifts meant cleaning lanes, putting away rental shoes, counting the till, and locking up. There were usually 3 or 4 of us scheduled for closing, so it never felt unsafe or isolating. That changed when the bowling alley hired a new manager named Kyle. He was in his late 20s, talked a big game about how he was going to turn this place around, and immediately started changing the schedule. One of his first decisions was cutting closing shift staff to save on labor costs. Instead of 3 or 4 people, there'd be just 2. One person working the front desk and lanes, and the manager closing up. I didn't think much of it until I realized I'd been scheduled for several closing shifts with Kyle. Just the 2 of us. The first night, everything seemed normal enough. Kyle was professional, maybe a bit overly chatty, but nothing that raised concerns. We cleaned up, he counted the money, and we left. He walked me to my car, which I thought was gentlemanly at the time, and said goodnight. The second closing shift with him, things got weird. We were cleaning up around 1 a.m. when Kyle suggested we take a break and bowl a few frames. I was tired and wanted to finish so I could go home, but he was my manager, so I agreed. We bowled 2 games, and the entire time, Kyle kept making comments about my form, coming up behind me to adjust my stance, putting his hands on my shoulders or hips. Each time, I'd step away and laugh it off awkwardly, but he kept doing it. When we finally finished cleaning and I went to grab my stuff from the back office, I realized Kyle had locked the front doors already. Just a security measure, he explained when I asked about it. We've had issues with people trying to come in after closing. I'd worked there for 6 months and had never heard about any such issues, but I didn't argue. He unlocked the door, and I left, feeling unsettled but telling myself I was overreacting. The third closing shift with Kyle, I made sure to stay busy and avoid any situation where we'd be in close proximity. I cleaned lanes on the opposite end from wherever he was working. When he suggested another bowling break, I declined, saying I had an early morning and needed to get home. He seemed annoyed but didn't push it. As we were wrapping up, I went to the back office to get my jacket and bag. The office was small, just enough room for a desk, a filing cabinet, and a safe. When I walked in, Kyle was already there, sitting at the desk, looking at something on the computer. "Hey, check this out," he said, gesturing at the screen. I stayed in the doorway. "What is it?" "Just come look," he insisted, that same annoyed tone creeping into his voice. Everything in me was screaming not to go into that office. "I can see from here." "What is it?" He turned the monitor toward me. It was the security camera feed, showing the empty bowling alley from multiple angles. "We've got cameras everywhere," he said, his tone casual. "Every lane, the parking lot, even the back hallway." He clicked through different camera views, and I realized he was showing me every blind spot, every area the cameras didn't cover. "That's good to know," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Yeah, important to know where you are and aren't being watched." He smiled at me, and something about that smile made my skin crawl. I grabbed my stuff quickly and told him I was heading out. He stood up, blocking the doorway slightly. "You know, we make a good closing team. I'm going to schedule us together more often." "Actually, I was going to ask about getting more daytime shifts," I said, squeezing past him. "My class schedule's changing next semester." He didn't respond, just watched me walk toward the front door. He took his time unlocking it, and I stood there feeling trapped, watching his hands work the lock like he was intentionally drawing out the moment. When I finally got to my car, I sat there shaking. I pulled out my phone and texted my mom, telling her something felt wrong with my manager. She called immediately, asking if I was safe, if I'd gotten to my car okay. Hearing her voice helped calm me down, and I drove home with her on speakerphone the entire way. The next day, I called the bowling alley owner, Mr. Patterson, who'd hired me originally. I told him I was uncomfortable working closing shifts alone with Kyle, and explained the incidents, the unwanted touching, the comment about cameras, the way he'd blocked the doorway. Mr. Patterson seemed genuinely concerned and apologized, saying he'd rearrange the schedule so I wouldn't be scheduled alone with Kyle anymore. For the next 2 weeks, the schedule was changed. I worked mostly daytime shifts, and when I did work evenings, there were always at least 3 people on staff. I started to relax again, thinking maybe Mr. Patterson had talked to Kyle and the situation was handled. Then one night, I picked up a shift someone else had dropped. I didn't check who the closing manager was. I just needed the hours. When I arrived and saw Kyle's name on the schedule board, my stomach dropped. But by then, I was already there, and calling out last minute would have been unprofessional. I decided I'd just be careful, stay visible, and leave as soon as humanly possible. The evening went by uneventfully. We were busy, which helped. But as closing time approached and the last customers left, I felt that familiar dread creeping in. Kyle started the closing routine, and I focused on cleaning my assigned areas as quickly as possible. Around 1:30 a.m., I finished my section and went to clock out. Kyle stopped me. "We're not done yet. Still need to mop the back hallway and check the storage room." Those weren't my usual tasks, but again, he was the manager. I grabbed the mop bucket and headed to the back hallway, the one with no cameras based on what Kyle had shown me weeks earlier. I was halfway through mopping when the lights went out. Not just the hallway lights, everything. The entire building went dark except for the faint emergency exit signs. "Kyle," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The hallway was empty behind me, empty ahead of me. I started walking back toward the main area, my footsteps echoing on the wet floor. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, but not mine. Slower, heavier, coming from somewhere in the darkness. Moving closer. "Kyle, this isn't funny," I shouted. Still no response, just those footsteps getting closer. I ran. I didn't care about the wet floor or the darkness. I ran toward where I remember the front door being, using my phone's flashlight to navigate. When I got there, I grabbed the handle and pulled. Locked. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. Behind me, I heard Kyle's voice, calm and measured. Where are you going? We're not finished closing. I got the deadbolt undone and yanked the door open, sprinting into the parking lot. My car was only about 30 feet away. I got in, locked the doors, and immediately called 911. The operator asked if I was in immediate danger. I said I didn't know, that my manager had turned off the lights, and I'd heard him following me in the dark. She said she was sending a patrol car and to stay in my locked vehicle. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. Kyle had turned the lights back on by then and was standing in the parking lot, acting confused and concerned. He told the officers there'd been a power surge that tripped the breakers, and he'd gone to reset them. He said he'd called out to me, but hadn't gotten a response, so he'd assumed I'd stepped outside. The officers looked at me, and I explained what had actually happened, the footsteps, his voice right behind me, the fact that the door had been locked. They took statements from both of us, but ultimately said it seemed like a misunderstanding. There was no evidence of anything criminal. But one of the officers, an older woman, pulled me aside before they left. Trust your gut, she said quietly. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't come back here alone. I never went back at all. I called Mr. Patterson the next morning and quit over the phone, explaining everything that had happened. He apologized profusely and said he'd handle it, but I was done. No job was worth that level of fear. I found out later from a friend who still worked there that Kyle had been fired about a week after I quit. Apparently, another female employee had reported similar behavior, unwanted touching, inappropriate comments, and making her uncomfortable during closing shifts. Mr. Patterson finally had enough evidence to let him go. It's been 4 years now, and I've had plenty of other jobs since then. But sometimes, when I'm in a building and the lights suddenly go out, I feel that same spike of adrenaline, that same urge to run. I think about those footsteps in the dark, about Kyle's calm voice asking where I was going, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gotten that door open. People talk about worst-case scenarios like they're unlikely, but I learned that night that worst-case scenarios start with a series of small, uncomfortable moments that you talk yourself out of taking seriously. The unwanted touching you laugh off, the weird comment you excuse, the situation that feels wrong but that you stay in anyway because leaving seems dramatic. Now I leave. If something feels off, I trust that feeling and I remove myself from the situation. Some people might call that paranoid, but I call it survival. Because the thing about danger is that it rarely announces itself clearly. It creeps up in small moments, testing boundaries, seeing how much it can get away with before you finally say no. And when you do finally say no, you realize you should have said it much, much sooner.